The wind came first, low and restless, crawling across the Wyoming plains like it had something to confess. It tugged at the tall grass, rattled the old fence posts, and carried the smell of dust and cattle and coming rain. Lena Carter stood at the edge of the highway with her coat pulled tight around her thin frame, one hand gripping a worn canvas bag, the other wrapped around her daughter's small fingers. She had learned that the wind out here never asked permission. It took what it wanted when it wanted. People, she was starting to understand, often did the same. Mia was asleep on her feet, her head leaning against Lena's hip, her dark lashes resting on pale cheeks that had grown too hollow for a child of 5. Lena adjusted her grip, lifting her daughter slightly, feeling the familiar ache in her arms. Hunger made children light in a way that terrified her. Light meant fragile. Light meant breakable. They had nowhere left. The words echoed in her mind, heavy and unrelenting. She had whispered them only an hour earlier, crouched behind an abandoned gas station with peeling paint and broken windows, trying not to let Mia hear the panic in her voice. Now the words followed her step for step as she stared down the endless stretch of road. No car slowed, no truck stopped, just the hum of engines passing by. Lives moving forward, while hers stood stranded at the edge of everything. 3 weeks ago she had still believed in maps. She had believed that if you followed the lines carefully enough, if you obeyed the directions, you would arrive somewhere safe. But the shelter in Cheyenne had been full. The diner job in Laramie had gone to someone younger, someone without a child clinging to her leg. The last of her money had disappeared into motel rooms and cheap meals that never seemed to fill Mia's stomach for long. Lena was 28, though exhaustion made her feel older. Her hair, once thick and glossy, was tied back in a careless knot, strands escaping to whip against her face. She had not looked in a mirror properly in days. She did not want to see the fear that had started living in her eyes. A deep engine growl broke through the wind. Slower this time, closer. Lena looked up, instinctively pulling. Mia closer as a black pickup truck eased onto the shoulder a few yards ahead of them. The truck was massive, clean despite the dust, its paint catching the late afternoon light. This was not a beat-up farm vehicle. This was money. Careful money. The kind that did not break down on the side of the road. The driver's door opened. Lena's first instinct was to step back. She had learned caution the hard way, but her legs did not move. Hunger and desperation rooted her to the spot just as firmly as fear ever had. The man who stepped out of the truck was tall, broad-shouldered, his movements unhurried. He wore worn boots, dark jeans, and a weathered brown jacket that had seen years of wind and sun. A cowboy unmistakably so, but not the kind she had imagined as a child. There was something quieter about him, controlled. His dark hair was touched, with silver at the temples, his face lined in a way that spoke of responsibility rather than age. His eyes found her immediately. Caleb Hayes had not planned on stopping. He rarely did. The road was usually just a way from one obligation to the next. A ribbon of asphalt connecting ranch meetings, auctions, and endless decisions that came with owning more land and cattle than most people could imagine. But something about the sight of a woman and a child standing alone against the wind had cut through his routine like a blade. He had grown up with nothing. He recognized that look. He walked toward them slowly, hands visible, his voice calm when he spoke. "You okay?" Lena swallowed. Her throat burned. She had practiced answers to this question in her head, always careful, always vague. But the weight of Mia against her side, the exhaustion pressing down on her chest, cracked something open. "We're fine," she said automatically, then hated herself for the lie. The man did not challenge it. He glanced at Mia, at the way her fingers clutched the fabric of Lena's coat, even in sleep. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You need a ride?" he asked. The wind carried his words away and brought them back again, like it wanted to make sure she heard. Lena hesitated. Every warning she had ever received screamed at her to say no. But the road stretched on endlessly behind him, and behind her was nothing but empty buildings and darker nights. "Yes," she said finally. If it's not trouble." "It's not," he replied without hesitation. "I'm headed east. You?" She almost laughed. East-west, it no longer mattered. Anywhere with food, she said quietly. Something shifted in his expression then. Not pity, not curiosity, recognition. Get in, he said. It's cold. Inside the truck, the air was warm, the leather seats soft beneath her stiff muscles. Mia stirred as Lena settled her in, mumbling softly before curling against her mother again. Lena buckled her in with hands that trembled, despite her efforts to steady them. Caleb closed his door and started the engine, pulling back onto the highway with practiced ease. For a few miles, neither of them spoke. The road unspooled ahead of them, the sky stretching wide and pale above. "You got family nearby?" he asked eventually. Lena shook her head. "Not anymore." He nodded once, as if that answered more than she had said. "My name's Caleb," he offered. "Lena," she replied. "And this is Mia." "She's beautiful," he said, and meant it. They drove in silence again, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that settled between people who did not need to fill every space with noise. Lena watched the landscape change, fences giving way to open fields, the hint of hills rising in the distance. She didn't start it. She realized she relaxed until her shoulders ached from lowering. After a while, the truck slowed and turned off the highway onto a long gravel drive that seemed to lead straight into the horizon. Lena's heart stuttered. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tight. "My ranch," Caleb answered evenly. "It's about 10 minutes from here." Her grip tightened on the edge of the seat. "I didn't agree to—" "You agreed to a ride," he said gently. "And you said you needed food. I can't drop you in the middle of nowhere again." She searched his face, looking for something dangerous, something false. She found neither, only certainty. "I won't stay long," she said. "Just enough to eat." "That's fine," he replied. "You don't owe me anything." The gravel crunched beneath the tires as they passed through a wide gate, bearing the name Hayes Ranch in wrought iron. The land opened up around them, sprawling and green, dotted with cattle and framed by distant mountains. Lena had never seen anything like it. The sheer size of it made her chest ache. The house came into view moments later. Large, sturdy, built of stone and timber, lights glowing warmly in the windows despite the fading daylight. It looked like safety, and that scared her more than the road ever had. Caleb parked and stepped out, walking around to open Lena's door before she could stop him. He reached in and gently lifted Mia, cradling her with surprising ease. "She can sleep inside," he said. Lena followed him up the steps, her legs unsteady, her heart pounding. Inside, the house smelled like wood and coffee, and something rich simmering in the kitchen. Real food, the kind that filled bellies and stayed. She stood in the entryway, suddenly unsure, suddenly overwhelmed. The weight of everything she had been holding back crashed into her chest. Caleb turned to her, Mia still asleep in his arms. "You're safe here," he said quietly. The words undid her. Lena pressed her fingers to her lips, her voice breaking as she whispered the truth she had been carrying for weeks. The truth that had brought her to the side of the road. "We have nowhere left." Caleb did not hesitate. He did not look away. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady, carrying a promise she had stopped believing in. "Then you have me." The storm did not pass quickly. It crouched over the valley like a living thing, pressing rain into the soil, rattling the windows of the diner until even the old neon sign outside flickered in surrender. Inside, the air felt thicker, charged with something unsaid. Jack Callahan remained standing near the table, his broad shoulders blocking the dim light, his presence both unsettling and strangely steady. Blair noticed how people seemed to orbit around him without realizing it, as if his gravity quietly bent the room. He was not handsome in a polished way. He was carved by years of sun and labor, his jaw set with the certainty of a man who had survived things without complaints. When he finally pulled out the chair across from her and sat, the wood creaked under his weight. And for the first time since she'd stepped into the diner, Claire felt as though she might be able to breathe. He didn't rush her. That alone felt like a gift. He simply waited, elbows resting on the table, hands clasped, eyes steady and unreadable. The child, Emily, Blair realized she'd said the name earlier without thinking, stirred in her arms, letting out a small whimper before settling again. Jack's gaze softened at the sight. a flicker of something unguarded passing over his face before it vanished. "You said you have nowhere left," he said quietly, not as an accusation but an invitation. The words cracked something open in Claire. She had practiced restraint like a skill, learned to keep her story folded neatly inside her chest where it couldn't spill out and make a mess. But exhaustion has a way of loosening even the tightest knots. She nodded once, then again, and suddenly the dam broke. She spoke in fragments at first, how she'd followed a man she loved across an ocean, believing promises that dissolved the moment life turned hard. How the farm they'd worked together had never really been theirs. How illness came without warning and took him in less than a year, leaving her with debt that grew faster than grief could heal. How the bank letters kept coming, each one colder than the last. Jack listened without interrupting, his face still, his eyes never leaving hers. When she told him about the eviction notice, about the long drive with no destination, about selling the last of her jewelry for gas money, his jaw tightened but he said nothing. When she finally whispered, "I don't want charity," her voice broke completely. "I just want a chance to stand again." Silence followed, deep and heavy, but it did not feel empty. Outside, thunder rolled like distant hooves. Jack leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose, as though making a decision he'd already been circling for a long time. "I don't offer charity," he said at last. "I offer work, and protection, and time." Claire looked at him, confused, wary, hope and fear tangling painfully in her chest. He continued, his voice steady, almost gentle. "I've got land 10 miles from here. A ranch big enough to swallow 100 people and still feel lonely. I need help, real help. Not just hands, but heart. I won't lie to you. It won't be easy. And folks will talk. They always do." His eyes held hers unflinching. "But if you come with me, you won't be on the street tonight, and no one will touch you or your child as long as you're under my roof." The words felt unreal, too large to grasp all at once. Claire's instincts screamed caution. Men with power often wrapped control in kindness. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Yet something about Jack's restraint, about the way he offered choice rather than demand, chipped away at her fear. "Why?" she asked softly for a moment, something like sadness crossed his face, deep and old. "Because once," he said, "I stood where you're standing, and someone gave me a door when I was out of walls." The waitress returned with fresh coffee, glancing between them with open curiosity, but neither noticed. Claire looked down at Emily, at the small rise and fall of her chest, at the fragile trust placed entirely in her care. The storm outside was easing now, rain softening to a whisper. She realized that whatever choice she made in the next few minutes would echo for the rest of her life. Slowly she looked back up at the millionaire cowboy who had offered her shelter without asking for her soul. "If I come," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "it's not because I'm weak." Jack nodded once, solemn. "I wouldn't take you if you were." And in that moment, as the thunder faded and something like dawn stirred beneath the clouds, Claire felt the first fragile thread of belonging stretch out before her. Uncertain, dangerous, but undeniably real. By the time dawn crept over the horizon, the ranch was no longer quiet. The wind shifted, carrying the low calls of cattle and the distant creak of fences, waking with the day. Dusk glowed gold in the early light, and the land stretched wide and endless, as if it had been waiting for something to change. Inside the main house, Eleanor stirred on the couch, where she had finally fallen asleep. Her daughter curled against her chest. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the unfamiliar weight of the blanket, the smell of clean cotton and wood polish, and the distant sound of boots on the porch brought it rushing back. Panic flared, quick and sharp, but it faded when she remembered the cowboy's voice, steady and unyielding, the way he had said, "Then you have me." She sat up slowly, brushing hair from her daughter's face, watching the rise and fall of the child's breathing, and something inside her loosened. She had spent years sleeping with one ear open, ready to run at the first sound of danger. This morning the silence felt different. It felt guarded. Caleb stood outside, leaning against a post, coffee steaming in his hand as he watched the sun climb. He hadn't slept much. His mind replayed the night again and again, the woman's whisper, the way she'd stood like she was bracing for a blow that never came, the instinctive certainty that had driven him to speak before thinking. He was a man who calculated risks, who built wealth by weighing every decision. Yet last night there had been no calculation, just resolve. The ranch hands arrived one by one, tipping their hats, throwing curious glances toward the house. Caleb felt their unspoken questions like pressure on his back. He didn't owe them explanations, but he knew rumors would start. Let them. He'd weathered worse than gossip. What mattered was that for the first time in years, Eleanor carefully eased her daughter awake, whispering reassurances she barely believed herself. When they stepped into the kitchen, the room was warm with light, and a plate of food waited on the table. Simple, Artie unmistakably prepared for them. She froze, emotions swelling in her throat. No one had ever prepared anything for her without expecting something in return. She didn't hear Caleb enter, didn't sense him until his reflection appeared in the window. He stopped when he saw her, hands lifting slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "Morning," he said quietly. "I hope you don't mind. Figured you'd both be hungry." She nodded, unable to speak at first, and guided her daughter to the chair. As the child ate with shy enthusiasm, Eleanor finally met his eyes. "You don't even know us," she said softly. "You don't know what trouble follows me." Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "I know what it looks like when someone's been running too long," he replied. "And I know this land. Trouble doesn't scare it. Neither do I." Later that morning, Caleb took Eleanor outside, showing her the ranch, not as an empire but as a refuge, the old barn with its weathered beams, the wide pasture where the grass rolled like waves, the small guest house tucked behind a line of cottonwoods. "You can stay there," he said, gesturing toward it. "No locks on the door unless you want them. No deadlines." She listened, torn between relief and fear. Every instinct screamed that safety like this never lasted, that kindness always came with strings. Yet when she looked at the land, at the sky that seemed impossibly open, something fragile and dangerous bloomed in her chest, hope. She swallowed hard. "And when they find me?" she asked. Caleb's jaw tightened, the muscles flexing as if he were already bracing for a fight. "Then they'll have to go through me," he said. "And this ranch." The certainty in his voice was absolute, not loud or boastful, but grounded, like the earth beneath their feet. As the sun climbed higher, Eleanor felt the weight of her past pressing in, the secrets she hadn't yet shared, the shadows she carried. She knew this was only the beginning, that refuge did not erase danger. But as her daughter laughed for the first time in weeks, chasing a butterfly across the grass, Eleanor realized something profound. She was no longer alone in the open. She had stepped into a life that terrified her because it offered something she had almost forgotten how to want, a future. And as Caleb watched them from a distance, hands in his pockets, heart heavier and steadier than it had ever been, he understood that the promise he'd made the night before had already changed them all. The land had claimed them, and in doing so, had set the stage for a reckoning that neither of them could yet see, but both were finally ready to face. Morning came to the ranch like a quiet promise, pale gold light spilling over the plains and creeping through the wide windows of the house. The land stretched endlessly, rolling hills dusted with dew, fences cutting clean lines through the earth, as if someone had once drawn order out of chaos and never looked back. Inside, the house was still, too still for a place that had, only hours earlier, sheltered desperation, fear, and a whispered plea that had changed 3 lives forever. Caleb Cross woke before the sun fully cleared the horizon, the way he always did. Habit was a stubborn thing. Even after years of wealth and comfort, his body still rose with the ranch hands, with the cattle, with the land itself. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, the events of the previous night pressing against his chest with unexpected weight. He had brought strangers into his home, a woman with haunted eyes, a child who slept like she'd been running her whole life and had only just stopped. He exhaled slowly and swung his legs off the bed. The house creaked softly as he moved through it. Boots in hand, steps quieter than usual. When he passed the guest room, he paused. The door was slightly open. Inside, the woman, Lena, sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, her posture rigid, like someone waiting for a verdict. Her daughter, May, slept curled beside her. Small fingers knotted into the blanket as if letting go might make the world disappear again. Lena looked up when she sensed him. Her eyes widened slightly, not in fear this time, but in something closer to uncertainty. "I didn't mean to wake you," Caleb said quietly. "You didn't," she replied, her voice low. "I don't sleep much." He nodded, understanding more than she knew. "Breakfast will be ready soon. You're safe here." "You both are." She hesitated, then whispered, "Safe is a word people say before it's taken away." The honesty in her tone stopped him cold. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, not crowding her. "On this land," he said, "my word is as solid as the ground under it. No one takes what's under my protection." Lena studied his face, searching for cracks, for lies, for the familiar signs of promises that would collapse. She found none, only a man worn smooth by responsibility and solitude. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why help us?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He glanced at the child, then back at the woman who had carried her through fire and ruin. "Because I know what it looks like when someone has nowhere left to go," he said. "And because I had the choice to turn away, and I won't live with being that man." The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, settling around them like something alive. Later that morning, the ranch came alive. Trucks rumbled, horses stamped, voices carried across the yard. Lena stood on the porch with May beside her, both of them watching as if observing another world. The vastness unsettled her. Cities had noise, crowds, places to disappear into. Here there was nowhere to hide, but somehow that made her feel more. Visible, not less. Caleb returned from the barn, hat low on his brow, sunlight outlining his broad shoulders. "I'll have someone show you around," he said. "You don't have to stay inside." "I don't want to be in the way," Lena replied quickly. "You're not," he said, firm but calm. "This place is big enough for more than one story." She almost laughed at that, almost. May tugged at Caleb's sleeve, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Are there really horses?" she asked. Caleb crouched to her level. "More than you can count. Want to see one up close?" Her nod was immediate, enthusiastic. Lena's instinct was to pull her back, to protect, to keep distance. But something in Caleb's expression told her this was not a risk. She let go. As Caleb led May toward the barn, Lena followed at a careful distance. The smell of hay, leather, and earth filled her senses. The horses were massive and gentle all at once, breathing warmth into the cool air. May's laughter rang out, clear and unburdened, and Lena felt something twist painfully in her chest. It had been so long since she'd heard that sound. But peace never lasted without cost. Later that afternoon, a black SUV rolled up the long dirt drive, its presence sharp and wrong against the openness of the land. Lena saw it from the kitchen window and froze. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, heart racing. Palms slick, breath shallow. Caleb noticed instantly. "What is it?" "They found us," she whispered, certainty flooding her veins. He followed her gaze, eyes narrowing. "Stay here." "No," she said, gripping his arm. "Please, if they're here because of me, then they'll deal with me," Caleb said evenly. He stepped outside as two men exited the SUV, suits dark, faces hard. They looked out of place, like predators dropped into the wrong ecosystem. The taller one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Cross," he called. "We're looking for a woman and her child. They don't belong to you." Caleb didn't move. "Everything on this land belongs to me." The man's smile faded. "You don't want to make this complicated." Caleb's voice was low, dangerous in its calm. "You already did." From the window, Lena watched, fear clawing at her ribs. She had run from men like this before, men who believed ownership could be bought, enforced, reclaimed. She had crossed borders, lost everything, survived only by never staying long enough to be cornered. And now, because of her, that danger had followed them here. Caleb took a step forward. "You have 10 seconds to leave." The men exchanged a glance. The shorter one scoffed. "You think money and land make you untouchable?" No, Caleb replied. But this does. His hand rested casually near his belt, not threatening, just certain. The land seemed to hold its breath. After a long moment, the taller man raised a hand. This isn't over, he said. It is today, Caleb answered. The SUV turned and disappeared down the drive, leaving dust and silence. Poetry, but it was honest, and it landed with more force than any vow. That afternoon, the ranch felt alive in a way it never had before. May helped where she could, folding laundry, learning the rhythms of the house, laughing softly when Lily tried to teach her the names of the horses. The sound of that laughter carried across the fields, and Ethan found himself pausing in his work just to listen. He realized then that wealth had never been about numbers in a bank account. It was moments like this, fragile, fleeting, fiercely real. As evening approached, clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something sharper, change. When the storm finally broke, it did so with violence, thunder cracking like a whip across the sky. The power flickered, then went out entirely, plunging the house into darkness. Lily whimpered, instinctively reaching for May, who pulled her close, whispering reassurances in her native tongue. Ethan lit the lanterns, their soft glow casting long shadows on the walls, turning the storm into something almost intimate. They sat together in the living room as rain hammered the roof. The world beyond the windows reduced to sound and shadow. He spoke then of her fears, not just of the men who might come, but of trusting happiness again. She had learned the hard way how easily it could be taken. Ethan listened, really listened, the way he always had with his land, with his animals. When she finished, he said quietly, "Nothing worth having comes without risk. But I won't let you face it alone." It wasn't a promise made lightly. It was a line drawn in the dirt. The storm passed as suddenly as it had come, leaving the air clean and cool. When the power returned, the house felt different, smaller somehow, as if the darkness had drawn them closer in ways light never could. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep, Ethan and May stood on the porch again, watching the stars emerge one by one. She whispered almost to herself, "I never thought I'd feel safe again." Ethan didn't answer right away. He just reached for her hand, grounding both of them in the present. "Then stay," he said finally. "Stay as long as you need." In that quiet moment, with the vast Texas sky stretched above them and the land breathing beneath their feet, something unspoken settled between them. The future was uncertain. Shadows still lingered at the edges. But there was also a strength they hadn't known before, born from shared storms and steady resolve. And for the first time since she'd whispered that they had nowhere left to go, Mai understood the truth of Ethan's words. She had him. And sometimes that was enough to face whatever came next.